thing all the engineers and all the quantitative finance guys learned in the financial crisis was that you had this probability set. The world just doesn't work in this perfect probability set, right? And so you can use models, you can use statistics, you can use math to approximate, to try to figure it out, make a really good guess. But at the end of the day, you really need to have some margin of safety in your models, because the model will never capture everything that you needed.
Welcome, everyone, to this Liberty Ventures podcast. As always, my name is Alexander McCoben, founder and general partner of Liberty Ventures, and we're using this podcast to accelerate the development of this ecosystem of purpose-driven business leaders, investors, executives, and entrepreneurs who are all committed to advancing a free and prosperous future. And I am tickled pink to be able to talk with an old friend, Jared Frost, who has a fascinating career path. He's worked on Wall Street, he's been in real estate, he's an entrepreneur himself now, and has a ton of stories and insights from those many experiences to share with you all today. But Jared, I'm not going to try and cover everything. I'm going to let you introduce yourself. Thank you so much for being an early member of the Liberty Ventures ecosystem and for taking the time to share your wisdom with the community.
Well, thanks for having me, Alexander. I'll be honest, this is my first real actual podcast that I'm not personally hosting. So I just appreciate an opportunity to do this for the first time. I guess my background is where we want to start, right? So
yeah, I always like to start with your story. What's led to who you are and what you're doing today?
So as you kind of mentioned, first of all, thank you again. And as you kind of mentioned, I'm probably the craziest, weirdest, oddest finance doc that people have ever met. So, little known fact about me, I actually have my undergraduate degree in aerospace engineering. So I spent 2 summers, working on the drone program and flight simulators and all that kind of stuff. And that's what kind of really convinced me that I hated engineering and wanted to get into something a little more dynamic. And that's when I got into quantitative finance and financial engineering. So my master's is in that. I spent 7 years on Wall Street trading structured derivatives for Credit Suisse. May she rest in peace. Learned a lot. I mean, I was there for Bear's bankruptcy, Lehman's bankruptcy. I was there for the flash crash, all the debt crises between Europe, the U.S. downgrade, Europe 2, and all that stuff. And so you learned a lot. Left Wall Street, got into real estate private equity. So I was working for a firm out of Denver, doing some real estate development in Mexico City, Monterey, outside of Cabo, worked on some special sits, kind of commercial stuff. And then honestly, life kind of hit me in the face a little bit, had to hit the reset button. And, that's when I got into classic residential real estate sales. I've been a realtor for the last 6 or 7 years, actually no longer a realtor, but I've been a real estate agent for the last 6 or 7 years. And, we've kind of stumbled upon a model where, I'm lucky where I can use all these different things, right? Whether it's knowledge of computers and technology, knowledge of social media, knowledge of finance, knowledge of kind of how all this stuff is working in order to create a better model to deliver residential real estate across the country. So, now leaning on all those different skill sets and paths to try and create a product that I think can really change affordability for Americans.
So I want to get into that venture in a little bit, but let's take it back to the beginning of your story. I actually didn't know myself that you were in engineering before you went into everything else. Why did you not stick with that? You said you realized that's not what you wanted to do, but why?
Yeah, so I actually had, yes, my undergraduate is in aerospace engineering. I actually spent 2 summers at Sandia National Labs in Albuquerque working on some flight simulators for the drone program. So what's really interesting about that was that, the technology was really cool, right? It was augmented reality, flight simulators, and, if you can imagine, it was Pokemon Go for Navy SEALs. It was pretty much what we were working on, 10 years before it came out. And I'm pretty sure my code ended up in Pokemon Go. I don't think it actually did, but I have suspicions. So,
see, you were looking for some quotables on this podcast, and that's a great one right there. Pokemon Go for Navy SEAls. I love that.
Pokemon Go for Navy SEAls. That's pretty much what it was. And so, it was really cool. And you and I could spend as much time as you want talking about that stuff. We could talk about the evolution of drone technology, the evolution of aerospace technology over the last 20 years, kind of how, what SpaceX is doing, all super fascinating stuff. But the problem is that for me, it just wasn't dynamic enough. I would go into the office and 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. was the same thing. The next day you knew exactly what you were going to work on. The next day you knew exactly what you were going to work on. And I just kind of saw my life all rolled out in front of me. And I'm like, I can't, it just seems a little boring to me. So, of course, found the opposite the opposite arena in derivatives trading, especially during the financial crisis. And, it just kind of stuck. And so I tend to go more toward ventures that are more dynamic, more chaotic. I don't really know how else to describe that.
Well, let's illustrate the chaos of working on Wall Street, being a derivatives trader for everyone here. I know you've got stories from this. What's the first one that comes to mind that represents your time there?
I'm going to censor this a little bit. I will say the language was a little.
Do what you need to.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's also changed a lot. I think I really got, in my impression, kind of the last gasp of, I would say, the traditional capital commitment liquidity providing model on Wall Street, where there are a few stories. A few that are probably too long, but one really quick. So I was trading energy, metals, and mining. So I was responsible for market making for energy, metals, and mining sector, all single stocks in the U.S. We traded a dispersion strategy. So everyone was kind of responsible for different sectors, and we could look at the portfolio as a whole and kind of do our risk, but every trader had to know a name or different names and stuff like that. So Occidental Petroleum, ticker Oxy. I forgot when and what, or the years are kind of whatever. I want to say it's like 2013 or something like that. I think it was summer, maybe like a June or August report or something like that. And one of the biggest clients of the bank, this massive hedge fund that one of my very good buddies actually used to work at, calls at 3:50. So the market closes at 4 o'clock. I've got 10 minutes to go. And he's like, okay. The call from the sales guy was, hey, Frost, Oxy, par calls 10,000 how? That's all he said. And what he said there was par meaning 100, calls meaning upside contracts, 10,000 meaning 10,000 contracts, which are options on 1 million shares of $100 stocks. It was a $100 million trade, and they were reporting 10 minutes later. So they were reporting at 4 o'clock. The hedge against that trade would have been $50 million of stock to buy of Oxy with 10 minutes to go. There was no way to for me to get out of that, whatever. So of course, my bosses hear this, everyone's freaking out, because it's just, we have 10 seconds to make a market. And we made a market that we thought was right. It wasn't very good, but it was a big trade. And so, the guy hangs up my sales guy, who, by the way, was the biggest creep, just jerk. Of course he represented this, everyone was just pissed off, whatever. Market closes. Fast forward 15, 20 minutes, Oxy reports, the stock's running. We would have lost a ton of money on that. But the guy calls us back at 4:15. So futures trade from 4 to 4:15. So he's trading futures the entire time. And he calls us back at 4:15. He's like, hey, is this Frost, the trader? I'm like, yeah, man, what's going on? He's like, hey, you know who this is? Let me guy knows this. He's next time I give you a call, don't be a dick and make me an effing market. And then just hangs up on me. And the best part was that my entire desk was listening to the call. So there were about 40 people on mute because, you can see all the lights and stuff like that. And that's kind of what it's like being a derivatives trader on Wall Street. You get yelled at all the time. You never make anybody happy. You have to protect your book. And honestly, the best day is when you just don't, everyone just kind of walks away and, no one's hurt too badly. And that's kind of what it's like being a trader on Wall Street, for sure.
And here I thought you were going to say the best day is when you get to walk away from that finally and move into something else.
Yeah. I mean, traders don't die, right? They just move on to different capital. So, I think it's whether you're, obviously I went to Wall Street because when I was there, it was still height of the financial, the run up, right? So, I got into finance in 04, 05, 06, started trading in 07, and no trader went to Wall Street in 2007 not wanting to start his own hedge fund. Right. I mean, that was the only reason why you went. Why would you want to stay as a sell side trader? And so, I just think that once you get hooked on P&L responsibility, whether it's trading or operational P&L, and when you're used to kind of making decisions, being responsible for what your production is, it's kind of hard to give that up. And so, even though that was a very weird kind of entrepreneurial setting, it definitely taught me a lot around how people react, what risk is, how to handicap things, what liquidity actually means. And so, it was a really good experience outside of that.
Being on Wall Street, especially through the 2008 financial crisis, I know that you learned a lot from that. What were, say, the top 3 lessons you took away, especially as you moved on into other paths with your career?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I think the first one is that anything that can happen will happen. Like, the thing all the engineers and all the quantitative finance guys learned in the financial crisis was that, you had this probability set and, the world just doesn't work in this perfect probability set, right? And so you can use models, you can use statistics, you can use math to approximate, to, try to figure it out, make a really good guess. But at the end of the day, like, you really need to have some margin of safety, some factor of safety, whatever you want to call it, in your models, in your pricing, in whatever you're doing, because like the model will never capture everything that you need it to. I think that was probably the first lesson, because I was a very data and model driven guy through Wall Street. And then as you get into private equity and you get into, in my opinion, the hand-to-hand combat of like building a business, you realize model doesn't quite do it. So, which has been great. I think the second thing too is really understanding like your own personal tolerance for risk, right? So like, and not being over levered yourself. So just making sure that you personally always have that, the savings, the cushion, the buffer, the rainy day fund, whatever you want to call it. And that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you're, a hedge fund manager, a derivatives trader, or, an IT guy on a help desk. Like, you never really know what life is going to throw at you. And the more cushion you have, the more margin you have in your own personal life, the more optionality you have and maintain. And what I've realized is that, I think people really get stressed out when they lose optionality. And so the more you can maintain your own optionality to make sure that you have the resources you need to pivot and do whatever you need to do, I mean, that's how you can really protect yourself.
I love that recommendation, especially on keeping optionality for yourself as an individual, because especially as being an entrepreneur, you throw yourself into whatever you're building, absolutely 120%. But it can be incredibly stressful if you don't have some sort of protection for what you're doing. And I've seen some people really crash and burn from not keeping some kind of optionality while still throwing everything at it.
And even, whether it's personal life or the business you're building or whatever, I mean, maintaining optionality should always be one of your highest priorities, right? And even going back to the conversations you and I had initially when you were getting Liberty Ventures off the ground, like it was like, well, I do this or do I do that? And really trying to evaluate like, well, if you make a decision, does that decision eliminate other potential pathways for you in the future, right? And so, maintaining that optionality for as long as possible and maintaining an ability to exercise that optionality, right, is what really gives people the power over any situation, in my opinion.
And this is actually something that I talk with a lot of our founders about. I'm noticing it's a pattern that keeps coming up. People are talking about an exclusive partnership with one client that wants to work with them, or the possibility of acquisition, or bringing on other co-founders. And one of the key questions I always ask is, do you need to make this exclusive? Is there a way to just keep your options open? Or they may not want to even have a conversation with someone because they don't think it's going to work out. And the thing I always tell them is, take the call, have the meeting, explore the possibilities. You don't know where it's going to go yet, and you want to keep your options open. And I think too many people stick to one path, or they think they need to make something exclusive when they really don't need to.
Totally. And when they do that, they also don't think about like the structure, right? So, I mean, exclusivity can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, even though it doesn't seem that complicated. And so, I think whenever you're talking about those types of contracts, exclusivity, bringing on partners, JVs, like whatever it is, like just also make sure you negotiate the divorce before you do the marriage, right? Like figuring out how to unwind those things so you can get back to, being in control of your own destiny is so important. And as someone who's gone through now multiple partnerships, multiple partners, multiple endeavors, nothing lasts forever, right? And so you just have to be prepared for it all to end. And preparing for the end gives you optionality, right? Because then you're not stuck into a bad situation when it does end because you're prepared for it. So I think those are all very interesting. I mean, absolutely great points that you brought up, for sure.
And you're absolutely right that nothing lasts forever. And I'll put a finer point on that. Everyone leaves the company or the organization they're in at some point, whether by choice, by force, or by death. It will happen. And so you have to start planning for that when you're starting a company or when you're joining one from the get-go.
Totally. I mean, I don't know if it's happening as now. I'm not in the tech space. I never was in the tech space. So like me and tech bros, like I'm sure we have a lot to talk about. Sometimes like I just am more of a traditional business guy. So like when I bring on partnerships, I'm like really trying to get people to last long term. It's not just like, oh, let's bring on this, CTO for a year so you can build out this thing and give them all this stuff and equity and like we'll go public and figure it out. Like, that's just not the business that I'm in. I just from what I understand, like those types of engagements and relationships get really really tough, and so whether if you're not prepared for the end, if you're not prepared for that transition out, if you as a founder are thinking this person's going to stay long term, but this person's really planning on staying shorter term, you can really get off sides. And so really having those conversations, having the open communication, all that's super important.
And that open communication gets to managing and an alignment of expectations. It's okay if you want to bring someone on for only 1 or 2 years. Just be very clear about that, and so that they're on the same page. And you also want to know if someone's joining because they only want to stay 1 or 2 years, so that you're able to plan out how you structure the team and what you're working on that way. There's no single right way and no wrong way to structure relationships, so long as you have a clear purpose in mind and that you're aligned with all parties involved in order to achieve that the way that everyone wants to.
And yeah, make it a win-win, right? Like you find the win-win, figure out where you can. As long as it's still a win-win situation, you're typically gonna have a really good shot of success. And I think you as a founder just need to know when. I think one of the biggest things that I've started learning as an entrepreneur and founder, manager, or whatever, is just like starting to feel the energy of when it shifts from a win-win to not a win-win, right? When maybe it's just a win 0 or whatever and not a win-loss, because you really know when it happens a win-loss. When it shifts from that win-win to a win-0, the 0 is really not motivated to stay in the relationship anymore. So like, really any sort of, noise, block, chaos can really, disrupt those types of relationships. So I think, you as a founder need to ensure that you're creating win-win relationships for as many people in your organization. So that way, you can kind of withstand some of the volatility that might happen in the market, withstand some of the stress, because if you have these loose relationships and not aligned relationships, like when stress happens, people are just going to flee. And that makes it really tough to rebuild.
100%. Now, I know that you're still building everything out for your new venture, and you're probably also going to have to censor yourself a little bit here, but as much as you're willing to share, tell everyone about the company that you're building right now and what prompted you to do this.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I think the prompt, and, give me like a thing if I'm going too long, because I could talk about this all day. The prompt I think is multifaceted. I think the prompt is, I went from Wall Street derivatives trading to cold calling for listings. Like that was how I spent my first year cold calling, 20 hours a week, literally dialing the phone book to try and get expired listings, because I didn't know anybody in Denver. So I taught myself how to cold call, how to sell, how to market. And through that experience, before I started building my team, was able to leverage other people's time and stuff like that. One of the biggest, hardest questions I ever had to answer as a real estate broker was, why should I hire you? You're not cheaper. You're not as experienced. You don't know the market as well. And blah, 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 blah. And we can just go down the list, right? Why should I hire you? And so all fair questions, right? I mean, you're making one of the biggest financial decisions of your life. Like you should be asking that question, why should I hire you? And then at the same time, I think what's really interesting is that, I started seeing kind of what's happening in the global macro landscape around some of these demographic shifts. After having dealt with that experience of being asked, like, why should I hire you? And having to, kind of manage the sales process without really any good objection handler behind that, I started seeing in the macroeconomic landscape what was happening. And, this draws on some of the experience I have from Wall Street in terms of really just understanding, like, how money works, how the macro economy fits into the financial markets, like the position that the Fed is in, some of the demographic stuff going on in the housing market and seniors and rates and the whole thing. And what I realized is that, there's going to be an affordability crisis if there isn't already. I would argue we're in the middle of one. And there's not going to be a way to solve that through the physical real estate supply chain. So you're not going to be able to lower real estate prices by flooding the housing market in the United States with supply of new homes, kind of like you did in 2007, right? Like materials are extremely expensive. Labor has gotten extremely expensive. Land is extremely expensive. And so it's just really hard to build right now. And you're not going to get millions of homes being built to flood the market and bring prices down. And so if you really want to solve this affordability crunch, the only way to do it is through financial engineering. So as a former financial engineer and a derivatives trader and someone who really understands like how the capital markets flow all the way into giving mom and pop a mortgage on their home, I think there's a real opportunity to make that process significantly more efficient. And as a result, it's our mission to increase affordability across the country by 30%, effectively taking $3,000 a month mortgages now and moving them down to $2,000 a month. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we can offer for the country. This is a model, in my opinion, that obviously provides a lot of social utility in terms of giving consumers a lot discretionary spending back. It helps keep home prices higher, which allows for higher home equity so that baby boomers can draw on those savings and not have their savings evaporate. And on the last side, it's also beneficial for real estate agents and mortgage originators because we can decrease earnings volatility by actually helping them answer the question, why should I hire you? And so if we can help a consumer afford a home that's physically 30 or 40% more than another real estate broker, I think we're doing a pretty good job.
So what I love about that story is it really is bringing together everything you've done in your career together. It takes your background with financial products, your experience with real estate, and finding a way to combine the two in order to help people out. And I think that's a pretty common path entrepreneurs take that not enough people realize. It's about bringing together everything you've learned, everything you've developed skills in, and applying it to a big problem that people are facing that no one else has figured out how to solve yet.
And it didn't start out this way. And I think most founders even say that, right? Like, I just wanted to pay my bills and not have to move back to New York with my tail between my legs. Like, all I wanted to do for that first year was like get through my first year, because I knew if I got through my first year, your second year was going to be easier, right? And so, when Blue Pebble started 6 or 7 years ago, this was not about changing the world, changing the way residential real estate is delivered. What we realized, though, is that we were relying on a lot of partners in terms of getting us to the closing table who, frankly, were not earning their keep. And so as I learned more about the kind of the other side of the coin and kind of how real estate is financed and how people are really paid and the value that's added in that kind of financial supply chain, really realized that there's not a lot of value added. And at the end of the day, the entire mortgage industry is selling 10-year bonds to mom and pop with a 4% bid offer spread. And so as a former derivatives trader who's used to seeing stuff in pennies and making money, if I have a 4% spread on one of the most liquid markets in the world, there's got to be an opportunity for us to take advantage of that. And that's what we're going to do.
As you're building up the company, what's been the biggest lesson you've taken away about being an entrepreneur as opposed to the time you had on Wall Street or in private equity, making this transition?
It's always harder. It's always harder when everything is going to be. It's always harder. It's always going to take longer, and it's always going to be more expensive. And it doesn't even matter whatever you think it's going to be, multiply it by 2 in terms of hardness, time, and resources. And then once you think that's scary, you multiply it by 2 again. And if you're okay with that, then you should actually go after it. It's kind of what I realized. I like to think, and I understand now based on personal experience, I'm not the best handicapper, business plan, or whatever. Things don't always go to plan, right? And it's just amazing how difficult it can be, right? I know that's not everyone's experience, but for us, that's been the experience. It's every day is kind of like a slog. We're just joking around. After I get off this, I need to go log on to 3 Secretary of State's websites and update stuff, and okay, and that takes me away from doing sales calls and stuff. So it's just every day is something new. It's going to be harder. It's going to be more expensive. You're going to be questioning yourself. Am I doing the right thing? And I think that's also why it's extremely important for entrepreneurs to find a really good purpose behind their company. So it can't just be, and it took me a while to find this in my company. It can't just be making money and surviving, right? Especially if you're an entrepreneur. There are a lot of much, much easier ways to make money and survive than be an entrepreneur. You do not if that's all you want to do, go get a W-2 9 to 5. You can make a great living now, and you will for the rest of your lives, especially if you're Gen X or if you're Gen X, Gen Z, millennial, even Gen X is like, we're gonna have jobs forever because these boomers are gonna have demand until they're like for years, right? So like, if you just want a job, go get a job. But like, what I've realized is if you want to be an entrepreneur, you really need to have some purpose behind what you're doing. Otherwise, those really long hours, those weekends, those early mornings, the driving 300 miles in a day to like all over town, it's going to be miserable.
I think that is a fantastic piece of advice to end on. But as I told you before, I have one question I always like to leave with. And this gets to a general philosophy that I have, that it's always best to give something first to people. And that if you want to connect with someone new, learn a new business, get into a new industry, best thing you can do when reaching out to them is to offer to help them out, just volunteer to do something. So for anyone listening who's interested in what you're doing, wants to pick your brain, or just wants to make a connection, what's something they could volunteer to do for you that you would get really excited about and respond positively to?
Yeah, I mean, right now we're trying to change the world one real estate agent and one mortgage originator at a time. So, we're trying to get the message out about what we're doing. We're trying to bring people onto our platform and just get more reps through what we think is a more efficient system. So if someone wants to help me, just an introduction to their favorite realtor or their favorite mortgage broker would be great. Like I'm just trying to talk to as many of my colleagues as possible, because we don't have a business plan to have 100,000 agents like some of these, bigger brokers out there. We just need 8 or 10,000, and that's over the next 10 years. So we'll start one by one and do it that way. So if anyone wants to help and reach out or connect, I'm happy to talk about what we're doing. If you want to help, just an introduction to your favorite real estate agent or mortgage broker would be absolutely awesome.
Fantastic. Jared, thank you for taking the time to share this with the community. Thanks for everything that you're doing. I'm super excited to see where you take it.
Alexander, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This has been a lot of fun.